My name is Mary, and I have been a doctor for nearly as long as I have been married to Adam. We've had fun times and hard times, but those 32 years together went by really fast. Our home was big and warm, always full of life, especially when our sons Larry and Brian were little. Larry and Brian were really different from one another, like night and day, but each one brought their own special joy into our lives. Adam and I are both doctors. We worked very hard to make a nice life for our family. Over the years, we bought a few apartments and rented them out to make some extra money. Life was good until one day Adam came home looking pale and more serious than I had seen him in a long time. "Mary, we need to talk," he said seriously as he set his medical bag down by the door. "I had some tests last week. The results are here. It's cancer, Mary." After that, there were many trips to the hospital, treatments, and long waits in waiting rooms. Adam fought hard, but the cancer just wouldn't give up. It was really sad to see the strongest man I knew get weaker and disappear. I had no medical knowledge that could help me with that kind of pain. One evening, while we were sitting quietly in the living room, Adam held my hand and said, "Mary, if things don't go as we wish, you have to make sure everything is okay with the boys. Less than text, the will is ready, and you will be okay with money." Soon after that talk, he was gone. The funeral was a sad event with family, friends, and coworkers coming from everywhere to show their support. But it was the silence in the house after everyone left that affected me the most. The empty spots where Adam was, with his things still in their normal places, it hurt to look and remember. A few days after the funeral, I was in the kitchen thinking about what to do with all the extra food. Larry walked in quickly, looking very worried and angry. Brian walked behind him, looking like he wished he was somewhere else. "Mom, we should talk about Dad's will," Larry said, being direct as usual. I let out a sigh and set down the cling film I was holding. "Sure, I understand. Your dad gave me everything. He wanted to check if I was handling things." Larry hit the counter with his hand and said, "But what about me and Brian? We are his sons. It's unfair that we get nothing." Brian walked in, trying to make things better. "Larry, let's take our time with this. Mom is still sad, and we can work this out without arguing." Larry gave him a glance and said, "It's simple for you to say. You don't think about the future the way I do." I rested against the counter, feeling their eyes on me. "Your dad and I made this life together, and he believed I would take care of everything." "I get what you're saying, Larry. I don't want to leave you out." "What happens next?" Larry asked, with his arms crossed and his voice raised. "Should we just wait until you think it's the right time to give us our share?" "Larry, please be careful with how you speak," I said, feeling a bit frustrated. "I am still your mom." Brian stepped in front of us, raising his hands like a referee. "You too, please. This isn't useful." "Mom, maybe we can find a compromise." I nodded and rubbed my head, thinking about it. "All right, this is what we can do. The apartments that your dad and I put money into, the ones in the downtown area." "Yes, those," Larry said. I gave him a look that told him to be quiet for a moment. "I was thinking you each take one. They're yours to live in or rent out. And from the savings, let's say $320,000 each to help you get started with whatever you need." Larry bit his lip, clearly doing the math in his head. "And the rest of the stuff, the house, the money?" he asked. "That stays with me for now," I replied. "When I'm gone, it will come to you as your father wanted." Larry looked like he wanted to argue more, but Brian nudged him and said, "Let's think about this. It's a fair start. Mom's not leaving us with nothing." Larry finally nodded, though he still seemed unhappy. "Fine, but I want this in writing, Mom. No more surprises." Of course, I agreed. We'll get everything documented properly. As they left the kitchen, I could hear Brian whispering to Larry, "Give her a break, will you? She's doing her best." Larry muttered something under his breath that I couldn't catch. Honestly, I didn't really want to. As I washed up the dishes, I wondered if Adam could see us and what he would think. I hoped I was making the right choice, but only time would tell. And time, that tricky thing, isn't always on your side. It was a sunny afternoon, one of those rare days that makes everything feel okay. Larry brought Julie over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating long, but Larry was head over heels for her. You could tell by the way he was fussing over her, which wasn't like him at all. They walked in, and right away Julie had this confident air about her, like she owned the place. She was dressed up and strolled into my living room with barely a hello, her eyes scanning everything around. "Nice place you've got here," she said, flipping her hair back as she sat down without waiting to be invited. Larry was sitting beside her, grinning like a fool. I forced a smile, trying to be a good host. "Thank you, Julie. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea?" "Coffee sounds lovely," she replied, then turned to Larry. "Babe, make sure it's black. No sugar." Larry nodded and headed to the kitchen, leaving me alone with her in my own living room, feeling like I was the guest. The silence was awkward until she finally spoke. "So Larry tells me you're pretty well off," she said, looking around at the decor. "I'm used to a certain standard, you know. My parents made sure of that." "That's good to hear," I said, not really sure what else to say. Larry came back with the coffee and handed Julie her cup. She took a sip and made a face. "Mem, it's all right. Anyway, we've been talking about our future together, planning ahead, you know." "That's wise," I said, glancing at Larry, hoping he'd give me some clue about where this conversation was going. Julie set her cup down and said, "Yeah, and speaking of planning, we've been thinking about the wedding. You know I want something special. Larry has probably told you. I saw this place that's perfect for a rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit pricey. It's about $50,000. I almost choked on my coffee. $50,000 just for the rehearsal dinner. Larry jumped in. "Mom, it's important to Julie. We want to start things off right." I put my cup down, feeling a storm brewing inside. "Look, that's a lot of money for a dinner, Julie. We need to be reasonable." Julie's face hardened. "Reasonable? Larry says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something that important." Larry was nodding along with her, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew he was asking too much. "I'm all for celebrating," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But $50,000 is more than I can justify." Julie stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not used to compromising on my standards, Mary. I made it clear to Larry that I expected a certain standard of living." Larry tried to calm things down. "Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground." "There's no middle ground on $50,000 for a dinner, Larry. That's final," I snapped, my patience running out. Julie picked up her purse and glared at me. "Fine. If that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to rethink some things." They left soon after, and I sat there stunned by what had just happened. The nerve of that girl coming into my home, drinking my coffee and telling me how to spend my money. It felt like a slap in the face, a wake-up call I wasn't prepared for. A few days later, I was out at the grocery store when Larry and Julie decided to drop by again. By the time I got home, Brian was awkwardly trying to entertain them in the living room. The tension in the air was so thick it made me want to turn around and leave, but it was my house. I gathered my courage and walked in. Julie, all dressed up as usual, handed me a list as soon as I put down my grocery bags. Mary, we've thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've decided on. I hope this will be easier for you to handle." I quickly looked over the list she handed me. It was surprisingly reasonable. Kitchen appliances, some nice china, even a couple of pieces of furniture. "This seems quite reasonable," I said, feeling a moment of relief. "I think these are wonderful choices, really." Larry looked at Julie with hope in his eyes, but just as I was about to discuss where we could buy these items, Julie's expression changed. Suddenly, she gasped, "Oh no, this isn't right. Give that back." She snatched the list from my hands and dug through her purse, pulling out another sheet of paper. "Here's the actual list." This new list was nothing like the first. It included an apartment, a luxury car, an exclusive vacation, and even diamond jewelry. My jaw dropped. "Is this some kind of joke?" Julie didn't flinch. "No joke, Mary. These are the gifts we expect. Only the best for our wedding." I stared at her, then at Larry, waiting for him to say something, anything, to show he didn't agree with this craziness. But he just stood there, looking between us, clearly conflicted, but saying nothing. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Larry, why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable." Julie cut in, her voice rising. "This doesn't concern you, Mary. You just need to pay up and keep quiet." Brian stood up, his face serious. "That's enough, Julie. You're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave. Now." The room was filled with tension as Larry and Julie gathered their things. Julie was muttering under her breath, clearly angry. "This is ridiculous. We'll remember this." They left, and the door slammed shut behind them. I sat down, feeling the weight of the whole situation pressing on me. Brian sat beside me and put an arm around my shoulders. "We'll figure this out, Mom, but you can't let them push you into giving more than you can or should. It's not right." He was right, of course, but as I sat there with my son, I couldn't help but worry about Larry. How had things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was filled with unspoken worries and fears for the future. I knew then that this was far from over. It was only going to get harder from here. In the weeks that followed, I received constant phone calls from Larry. Each one was more demanding than the last. His tone was desperate and sometimes almost frantic. "Mom, you don't understand. I can't look poor next to Julie's family," he'd argue, his voice cracking with stress. "You have the money. Why can't you just help me out here?" I sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed against my ear, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Larry, it's not about the money. It's about living within your means. Julie's expectations are too high, and you can't keep up with them without going into serious debt." He scoffed, his frustration boiling over. "What do you know about it? I'm not going to live like a pauper. I need more from the inheritance now. The amount you've offered isn't enough." "Larry, I've offered to cover half the wedding costs, up to $135,000, and give an $8,000 gift. That's more than generous. Everything has to be agreed upon with me, though. No surprises." There was a pause, then a sharp laugh from him. "That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there. Why are you holding out on me?" "Because it's not just about the money," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "It's about not feeding into this unrealistic fantasy that's going to ruin you." He yelled loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you." And with that, the call ended. Months passed in silence. I tried to keep myself busy with daily routines, trying not to worry about Larry, but the peace was short-lived. One afternoon, the phone rang, and it was my sister-in-law, Hannah. "Mary, I thought you should know." Hannah's voice was hesitant, careful. "Larry is flying all the wedding guests to Bermuda. He sold his apartment to pay for it and expects you to get there on your own. He mentioned you weren't interested in helping." I hung up, a mix of anger and sorrow swirling inside me. How could he be so reckless? Before I could process it all, Brian came into the room. His expression was serious. "Mom, there's something you need to hear." I recorded their conversation when they were sitting here in the living room. He handed me an audio recorder. I pressed play, and the voices of Larry and Julie filled the kitchen. "Your mom is just a nasty old woman with a fat wallet," Julie's voice said coldly. "We need to squeeze as much as we can out of her and then cut her off." Larry's voice responded, just as chilling. "Whatever it takes, Lauren. I'm not going to let her control us. If it comes down to it, I'll kick her out in her underwear." I turned off the recorder, my hands trembling. Hearing my own son speak like that about me, his mother, was too much. The room spun as I tried to understand the depth of his betrayal. Deciding to fly to Bermuda wasn't easy. But Brian was by my side, both of us tense but determined to face whatever awaited us. When we landed and approached the venue, I was taken aback by the sheer extravagance of it all. Flowers were everywhere, lights strung like stars across the evening sky, and music floated in the air. As we walked into the gathering, I spotted Larry and Julie mingling with the guests. They looked like the perfect couple, all smiles and laughter. My heart ached to see my son so lost in this artificial paradise. Before I could take another step towards them, Julie spotted us. Her smile vanished, replaced by a scowl as she marched over. Her high heels clicked angrily against the stone pathway. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed, stopping just inches from me. Her voice was loud enough to draw attention. "This is my day and you're not welcome." I was stunned, but before I could respond, her parents, who had overheard everything, came over. Her father, a tall and stern-looking man, spoke first. "Julie, that is no way to speak to your guest, especially not to Larry's mother." His tone was firm, and it made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her mother, looking just as upset, turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Mary, please come with us. Let's find you a place to sit." They guided us away to a table at the edge of the setup. It was clear that this spot was an afterthought, with no proper setting. The ceremony started soon after, with speeches that felt empty given the tension. Then, unexpectedly, I was handed the microphone. I stood up, my legs shaky, but my resolve firm. "I came here today to wish my son and his new wife a happy future," I began. My voice was steady despite how I felt inside. "But I also believe in honesty and integrity, qualities that have been sadly missing in the events leading up to this day." Julie's face went from pink to red. Her eyes glared at me with anger. I was asked for money, time, and again in amounts that no reasonable person would find justifiable. When I couldn't meet these demands, I was threatened with being cut off from my family and future grandchildren. My voice cracked a little, but I continued. Brian, seeing my distress, stepped closer and put a supportive hand on my shoulder. I nodded at him. "Then play the audio recording," I said. He pressed play, and Julie's voice filled the air, cold and calculating. She discussed how they would get more money from me. Larry's voice agreed, saying he was willing to leave me with nothing for the sake of his bride. The crowd murmured, shocked and disapproving. I turned off the recorder, and the silence was heavy. I gave my son an apartment and $35,000, and yet it was never enough, I said. Today, I'm making it clear that I will not be treated as an ATM or threatened. I am disinheriting Larry and Julie. I wish them well, but from this day forward, I am choosing to remove myself from their lives. The reaction was immediate. Julie screamed, her voice shrill and wild. "You've ruined my wedding. I curse you." After everything that had happened, coming back home was bittersweet. In the quiet, I made a decision that even surprised me. I quit my job. I had spent years healing others as a doctor, but now it was time to heal myself. Brian, bless his heart, had just graduated from college and was full of ideas and ambition. With the $37,000 I gave him, Brian opened his own tattoo parlor. It wasn't just any shop. It quickly became a place where art and skin came together in beautiful ways. Brian put his heart and soul into his work, and it paid off. He started entering tattoo contests, and soon his name was on everyone's lips in the local community. Before we knew it, he was opening more locations, creating a network of salons that became a hot spot for tattoo enthusiasts. I'd watch him sketch late into the night, his dedication a sharp contrast to the chaos his brother had chosen. "You're doing amazing, Ole," I'd say, pride swelling in my chest. During these peaceful months, Larry reappeared one afternoon. He showed up at the door, his eyes tired, his shoulders slumped, a far cry from the ambitious, sharp man he used to be. "Mom, I need to talk," he said, not waiting for an invitation to sit down. His voice was weary, so different from the demanding tone I had grown used to. I sighed and motioned for him to continue. "What is it, Larry?" "It's Lauren," he began, rubbing his face in frustration. "She's driving me crazy, wanting more and more. Nothing's ever enough. I got a second job, but it's still not enough for her." His words were filled with desperation, but they couldn't erase the past so easily. "Larry, I warned you," I said, my tone firm. "I told you that living like that with someone like her was unsustainable." I know you did," he replied, his voice trailing off. But the hopelessness in his tone replaced any explanation. "You thought that money would just appear because you wanted it to." My tone was harsh, years of pent-up frustration making it hard to soften my words. "Look at your brother," I said. "He started with the same amount and made something of himself without stepping on others." Larry bristled. "Yeah, well, not everyone's like Brian, are they? I have rights to the inheritance too, remember? And when you're gone, it'll come to me." That was the final limit. "Leave, Larry," I said, my voice steady and strong. "And don't return, not this time. You picked your way." His jaw got tight, and for a second I thought he might want to argue. Then he turned and walked out the door, slamming it shut. While I was quiet, Brian came down the stairs. He had heard the end of our talk. "Are you all right, Mom?" he asked. I nodded and hugged him tightly. "Thanks to you, I am now. Let's focus on the good things we can do and the life we can create." He hugged me back, making me feel better and reminding me that not everything was gone. At that time, I realized that even with the difficulties, the trip was still valuable. We had one another, and that was all we needed to keep going. After the storm with Larry was over, our home became calm in a way I hadn't felt in years. During this calm time, Brian brought someone special home. Her name was Joyce, and she was all the things Julie wasn't: nice, modest, and truly caring. As the weeks passed and turned into months, their relationship became stronger, and soon they shared the news of their engagement. The wedding was very different from Larry's fancy event. It was a nice, warm ceremony in our backyard, with flowers from the garden, decorations we made ourselves, and a few close friends and family. At the reception, I took Brian to the side. "You picked a great woman," I said, feeling very emotional. He held my hand and said, "I learned from the best," with a look that showed he understood. Things happened fast after that. They sold the apartment I gave to Brian, added some of their savings, and bought a small, comfy house just a few miles away. One sunny afternoon, while we were having tea in their new living room, Joyce told us some exciting news. "Mary, we are going to have twins," she said, her eyes bright with happiness. I almost dropped my cup because I was so happy. "Are there twins? Wow, that's great." Brian smiled, showing how proud he was. "We wanted you to know first. We are very happy, Mom." "Twins," I said again, letting the words settle in. "Grandkids." It was a new start, and I was excited to begin. News from Larry was not common. The last I heard, he got a divorce from Julie. She took almost everything in the split, making him start fresh in a new city. Even though he had caused pain, it was sad to think he was out there, having a hard time because of what he chose. One evening, I was looking through old photo albums when Brian came and sat next to me. He saw a photo of Larry and me from a long time ago. "Do you ever get messages from him?" he asked gently. I moved my head from side to side. "No, after all that has happened, he has picked his way, and I need to accept that, even if it hurts me a lot." Brian put his arm around me. "He's still my brother, Mom. Perhaps he will change his mind someday." "Maybe," I said, but I wasn't really sure if he would ever do it. "I thought that too, but right now we have a lot to do, especially with those twins coming soon." Brian laughed a little. "Yes, you are going to be the most active grandma around." We both laughed, and it made the room feel warm. Even with the past and all the mistakes and sadness, being with Brian right now felt just right. Life was going on, and so were we, with new hopes and dreams close by.